Hello, everyone. Welcome on back to the GSMC Football Podcast. I'm your host once again, Matthew Quinn. We're brought to you, as always, by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a pretty packed show for you today. We'll be covering all of the latest news and rumors going on with NFL free agency looming this week. And there's been a lot of movement over this past weekend, a lot of big deals, and we'll get into that, of course. Also, we've got a couple season outlooks for you later in the show. And we have a little bit of a mock draft that I came up with. And full disclosure, I came up with this draft or this mock draft before all of the news that's happened in the NFL free agency period over the past weekend. So just a little asterisk there just for you. And then just make sure you do stick around for it later in the show. I do have a special little segment at the end of the show, and it's kind of a Steelers sort of fan rant. So just be sure to, tune in for that. Not going to get, crazy with it or anything. There's just been a lot of news lately that I do want to talk about in regards to the Steelers. So stick around for that later in the show. And before we go ahead and start this show, I would just like to ask you guys that you like and follow the show. Any types of tips and donation, always appreciated. You don't have to do it, but it's always appreciated. And if you have a question during the show, we do want to hear it. Your input is a big part of what makes this show great, and we thrive on your energy and your insights, whether it's just a quick comment, a thoughtful question, or an opinion that you just have to share. Don't hesitate to drop it in the chat. Now, if you want to make absolutely sure that your message gets or stands out rather and gets featured on the show, there is an easy way to do that. Just use the super chat feature. Just click the $sign at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you all of this sports content that you love, and we do appreciate every bit of your support. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking, hit that super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and exciting as possible. And if you prefer, you can also go to gsmcsports.net to tip, donate, and leave a comment or a question there. We couldn't do what we do without you guys' amazing support, so we do appreciate it. We're so thankful to have you as part of our community. And again, the link is gsmcpodcast.net. So let's go ahead and get into this pretty packed show that we have for you today. First segment that we're going to cover is it's a pretty big one. There's been a lot of news going on in the NFL over the past weekend as we get closer to the free agency and the tampering period, which opens tomorrow. And then the official kickstart of the free agency is on Wednesday at about 4 p.m. So all of these deals that you're seeing and all of the deals that are, in the process of being made, they can all be finalized as of Wednesday at 4 p.m. So a lot of stuff to get into. The most recent one to get into, we are going to get into a little bit later in the show on my final segment, but I did want to touch on it a little bit right here, and that's the DK Metcalf trade to the Steelers that just happened as the time of recording this just happened a few hours ago. And right now it looks like the Steelers gave up just a second-round pick this year. Some teams thought that there was news in the NFL that maybe he would require a first-round pick to get away from Seattle, but his price did lower over the course of the last few days, and they ended up trading him for a second-round pick. Now they are going to sign him to a 5-year, $150 million deal, which would make him the highest paid player in Steelers franchise history. Not even Ben Roethlisberger got those numbers in terms of a contract. He did get a $100 million contract when he just had won his second Super Bowl. They gave him a nice big payday then, but this is unprecedented for really what the Steelers normally do. They really needed to go out and get a big playmaking wide receiver to pair with George Pickens, and they did that tonight. And I think it's a really good pickup. As I said, we're going to get into a little bit further detail later in the show. So if you're a Steeler fan or just a football fan in general who likes that, that type of stuff, just stick around to the end of the show and we'll get into that. A couple other things happened over the weekend in free agency. Another thing that happened just a few hours ago, about an hour or so before the DK Metcalf story actually, was that Josh Allen went ahead and signed an extension with the Bills, over $330 million extension. And obviously that's going to keep him there for as long as he, wants to play, essentially. It's a big time contract, and he had just won MVP last year and, came off of that year in which he won MVP. He had 40 touchdowns and just 6 interceptions, 40 total touchdowns. So that's including his 12 that he got on the ground. And of course, the rest through the air. So he was very, very productive last year. There was a little bit of a controversy about him winning MVP over Lamar Jackson, but honestly, both of the guys were deserving of their award, so I don't really see the issue. And Josh Allen, or if Lamar would have won it, wouldn't have seen the issue there. They were both very deserving. But Josh Allen, this is his first MVP, so now he's got just about everything he wants except for a Super Bowl appearance and Super Bowl championship. Keeps running into the Kansas City Chiefs every time that they go into the playoffs. So, and we're actually going to get it a little bit further into detail about the Bills later on in the show. That's one of our season outlooks that we've got as we finish off the AFC East. But big deal there for the Buffalo Bills. They made a couple other moves as well. Von Miller, on the same day, just a few hours before the Josh Allen news, he was released. And that saved a few, $1 million in cap space. And then not shortly after that, we hear about the Josh Allen deal. So, no real surprise there. A few days ago, also, Greg Rousseau, the defensive end for the Buffalo Bills, the Pro Bowler, he actually signed an extension as well. So he's going to be there for at least another 3 years because it was a 3-year extension. So the Bills are making some moves there and shoring up some of their big-time players. They've got a couple guys that are free agents that they'll have to address, of course, but we will, of course, get into that in more detail a little bit later on in the show. A couple other things that happened today. Davante Adams, one of the other big-time wide receivers that were out on the market, he has a new home as well. He is going to the LA Rams to pair with Puka Nacua, and then, of course, Matt Stafford coming back as well. That happened about a week or so ago with the news there. So the Rams are kind of loading up to try and make another run at this Super Bowl title, now that they have Stafford back and their window is still, relatively open. A lot of people, myself included, honestly, thought that the Rams were going to take a step back when Aaron Donald retired, but they actually ended up being pretty good last year and were pretty close to beating the eventual Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles in that playoff game, that Snow Bowl in Philly. And that was a good game. And they just, they obviously said that they were going to get rid of Cooper Kupp, allow him to seek a trade elsewhere. So he is on the out. So they needed another receiver to come in and take that spot. And they get Davante Adams on a 2-year deal. So that is very beneficial to both parties. Davante Adams goes to a team that is a contender, and he's got a quarterback that is still very much, one of the elite passers in the league, and Matt Stafford. So, good situation for Davante Adams to find himself in after his last few years, both being in, Oakland/Las Vegas. And then, of course, with the Jets, for a portion of last year. He hasn't necessarily had the best surroundings, in his career since he left Green Bay. And this kind of gets him back into that whole, contending team surrounding. And we've seen what Davante Adams can do on a team that is considered a contender. So he's still got a lot left in the tank. I expect him to do good things in LA, and he's not going to have to be like the main number one guy. Puka Nacua draws a lot of attention too. So, good situation for Davante Adams to be in. Another situation that honestly is a little peculiar that kind of took me a little bit by surprise is this whole Myles Garrett thing. Obviously, we've talked about it on this show about where I could see him potentially landing. And with all of the mess that happened, and especially over the weekend with the news coming out that owner Jimmy Haslam refused to meet with Myles Garrett to discuss, their future, essentially, it was very much looking like Myles Garrett was going to be on his way out. And it didn't seem like money was really the issue, from everything that was reported. The Browns had offered him a deal and he turned it down, saying that he wanted to go to a team that was contending, because he wants to win. But then we get the news earlier today, or it might have been yesterday. I don't know. There's so much news that happened today. It's hard to keep track. But either way, we get the news that Myles Garrett is actually going to be back in Cleveland on a deal that's going to make him the highest paid non-quarterback player in NFL history. So the Browns were able to free up some cap space a few days earlier when they restructured Deshaun Watson's contract, and now they're going to be paying Deshaun Watson till at least 2029. So that's a whole other, issue to talk about there that we can talk about on another day, because that was, one of the worst contracts in NFL history that they just keep restructuring and restructuring. So they did that again with Deshaun, saved about $34 million in cap space. And then, shortly after that, we get the Myles Garrett news. So obviously they were trying to free up money to give that contract to Myles Garrett, and they were able to do so. So, ultimately a good move for the Browns by keeping Myles Garrett, but this doesn't change their trajectory, in my opinion. If anything, I think it makes them all the more likely to pick one of the top two quarterbacks that are going to be available, whether it be Shedeur Sanders or Cam Ward. Cam Ward's probably the better prospect, but I don't know if he's going to be there, or not. It just all depends on what the Titans decide to do with their number one pick, whether they trade it or they, use it and go quarterback, or maybe go defensive line or something like a lot of people have been talking about. But either way, good move for the Browns to keep him there. He's a great defensive player, and he's still a player that you can build your defense around. Browns still have a couple of decent players on defense, but, that's not where the issues really lie. Of course, there are some issues on defense, but mainly they need to find a quarterback and, a viable one, and they're going to have to do that, whether that's in free agency or if they decide to draft a quarterback, which is looking increasingly more likely, especially with the news of Myles Garrett returning there. I can't imagine he agrees to return there unless they give him some sort of guarantee that they're going to go after a certain quarterback, or maybe they already have a deal in place for a certain quarterback, or maybe they go draft a guy, So we'll have to see what they do. It's always an interesting, proposition when you're talking about the Browns and their front office, as they've made a lot of head-scratching decisions in the past, but signing Myles Garrett's not one of them. They got the deal done. He's going to be there. So that story extinguished a lot sooner than I thought it was going to. I thought this was going to bleed into the preseason and possibly even the regular season with the Browns not budging. But they got a deal done, so we can all move on to the rest of free agency. Speaking of which, there were a couple of other moves that were of note. One of the more, eye-browsing ones that we saw over the weekend was Geno Smith traded to the Raiders. So that's now the Seahawks have cut Tyler Lockett. They have traded DK Metcalf to the Steelers, and now they have traded Geno Smith to the Raiders, which takes them off the board as potentially drafting a quarterback with their first overall pick. They might still do it, you never know, but you have to figure Geno Smith reuniting with Pete Carroll, he's going to be the guy there. For at least, the next few years, maybe the next 2 years, maybe they draft a guy and have him sit behind Geno Smith, whatever the case. But it's looking like it might open their draft up a little bit to maybe taking just the best possible player available at the time, or maybe they focus on a little bit more of what they need. Their offensive line has grown up a little bit, so, they may not go offensive line first round. Defensive line seems to be the popular, opinion of most teams because of how deep the class is. So, we'll get into the Raiders with our season outlook of them coming up in the next few days or so. Just a couple of quick more ones just to round up. Joey Bosa released by the Chargers. There's talk that he could end up going to San Francisco. San Francisco has actually reached out to Joey Bosa about a possible Nick and Joey reunion in San Francisco. That would be an interesting pairing there. So they've talked about a potential contract, and it's looking like they might be the ones that get the job done in terms of signing him. Long way to go. Other teams can pop up. Free agency hasn't officially started yet, so anything can happen between now and the start of free agency. But that's the team to watch out for, Joey Bosa, that is. There's other teams, of course, that are, interested in defensive players and defensive line players. So It's going to be interesting to see how all of this free agency stuff plays out, as it usually always is. It's a lot of fun to follow it and to, read up on everything that happens, all the new guys that are moving, same face, new place sort of thing. But yeah, so that covers it for just about all I can really, get into. For now, we're going to talk more about it as the free agency gets going. But we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and we're going to talk about my mock draft. It's just picks 1 through 5. Just trying to keep it relatively brief there, but we'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, like I said, this was a list that I made up before all of the news this weekend in free agency. So some of the picks might be a little off depending on what teams have done, in free agency thus far. So we will be right back. Just stick around, and we'll get right into that mock draft.
Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
All right, guys, welcome on back to the show. Once again, before we get into the second segment of the show, just want to remind you guys, any type of donations, tips, support, any kind of question or comment you might have, go ahead and write that down in the super chat or in the comments below. Any type of feedback is always appreciated, just so we can get a dialogue going, and you can support the channel by doing that as well. So once again, just hit up the GSMCsports.net and you can type in your super chat, and then we will get to that as soon as we can. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get right into the next segment of our show. We're going to be talking a little bit about mock drafts. I'm sure a lot of you have probably already seen a lot of different mock drafts from different, draft analysts, draft experts, whatever you want to call it. I am by no means a draft expert, but I am going to do the best I can on what I believe some teams might be able to go. So we're going to start with the number 1 overall pick, and that belongs to the Tennessee Titans. I also just want to also preface this by saying I'm not taking into account any potential trades that might happen. I know that the Titans have been in talks with the Giants primarily about possibly trading out of that number 1 spot. I'm not taking any of that into account. This is just assuming no trades happen. This is what the teams, who the teams are picking and all of that. So that could change on draft night, before draft night, whatever you want to call it. So just, something to keep, in mind. So with the number 1 pick, I have the Tennessee Titans going Abdul Carter, the edge rusher from Penn State. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about him lately because of his issues injury-wise. I mean, there's no doubt that he is a great playmaker and has the potential to be one of those kind of guys like how Micah Parsons was coming out of Penn State, how great that he was as a prospect. There's a lot of comparisons there. He's, quick, powerful, very good edge rusher from Penn State. But those issues, of course, were with his injuries. He has a shoulder injury that he suffered in the Boise State playoff game. He also has a knee issue that he might have to have, or probably will have to have, surgery on. So that's a concern as well. And then there was an issue, I believe it was regarding his foot or his ankle or something like that, where it's sort of like a chronic issue that he has with it. So that was another thing that came up that was a little weird. But those are questions, that could make him potentially fall and maybe cause the Titans to move out of that number one pick. Maybe they trade it to a team like the Giants so they can go after a quarterback or something like that. But as of right now, I have the Titans taking Abdul Carter. As I said, could change, depending on the situation. So over at number 2, I have the Cleveland Browns. I know we talked a little bit about them in the first segment. I have them going after Cam Ward with the number 2 pick, and I think that is much more likely now than it was when I originally made this list. It seems as though, especially with Myles Garrett coming back, it just seems like they're going to go quarterback here just simply because I don't believe Myles Garrett agrees to come back unless he has some certainty as to what they're going to do, at the quarterback position. Because, yes, I know Myles Garrett doesn't play offense, he plays defense, but it's very important to have a number one quarterback and have a franchise guy, especially if you're on defense and especially if you want your defense to have a rest. You want to have a quarterback that's good enough to have a sustained offense and have sustained drives so that he gives your defense rest so they can be much more effective as the game and ultimately the season goes along. So definitely a guy that I could see them going after, especially with the Myles Garrett news. Cam Ward coming out of Miami, he's a solid quarterback. I remember, I'm a Gators fan, so I remember watching games last year whenever the Gators would play Miami, and he's unbelievably calm in the pocket. Like, if you go and watch some of his replays, some of the stuff that he's done in his college career in Miami, you can just watch him in the pocket as a play is going on, and he's just standing completely still. Not because he doesn't know what he's doing, but he's just that poised in the pocket. Now, he's not going to be able to just be standing in the pocket like that in the NFL, not unless he has the best offensive line in the game, really. And even then, you can't really do that with the strength and agility that these NFL defensive linemen and, linebackers, present to you, So it'll still be, a solid pick, I think, for the Browns, but they've got a long way to go to get to where they want to go. And I think getting a guy like Cam Ward is a good step in that direction. Even if you go and get a veteran and, say you go get a guy like Aaron Rodgers or something, or Russell Wilson to, have the starting job for about a year or so while, Cam Ward learns behind him. You could always do that. I mean, that it's not something that a lot of teams seem to really do much anymore. But if you take a look at the last few, teams that have actually done that, take a look at Patrick Mahomes. He didn't start his rookie year. He sat behind Alex Smith, and then he came in his second year, and, the rest. Patrick Mahomes is one of the best quarterbacks of all time, let alone, just in the NFL in general. Aaron Rodgers, he sat behind Brett Favre for about a year or two before he got in. When he got in, he made the most of his opportunity, ended up winning the Super Bowl with Green Bay. There's so many different examples of this happening. So I feel like teams need to be more patient with their quarterbacks, Give them a year to learn behind somebody. It's not the end of the world if your draft pick doesn't start the day that you get him. Just because you draft him really high doesn't mean that he has to be a day one starter, I mean, he can be if it's a different position, but a quarterback is the most important position in the game. And if you shove a guy in there that's not 100% ready for the pros, you could end up ruining his confidence and set him back a number of years. And then you end up with a guy like Justin Fields' situation when he was in Chicago, So it's risky, Sometimes not all quarterbacks are C.J. Stroud or, something like that where they can come in and just have an immediate impact like that. So just be patient with these quarterbacks is all I'm saying. So getting back to our mock draft here, though, number 3, I have the Giants selecting Travis Hunter, which is the slash player out of Colorado. He plays wide receiver and cornerback. He's very good at both positions. Won the Heisman last year, of course. He would be a weapon for any team. The Giants needing more playmakers or more guys that can do different things with this whole rebuild that they're trying to do. Still a question as to what they're going to do at quarterback. They could very well pick a quarterback with this pick, but I personally believe that they're going to end up signing Russell Wilson and have him be their quarterback next year. And that way they have Travis Hunter and Malik Neighbors should they choose to go that route in receiver, or, of course they can have him play defensive back as well. I personally think that they should have him be a corner because, he's a good pure corner. Have him be a corner, but sprinkle him into different packages in the offense, at least at first, ease him into that because he's not going to be able to play, every single down on defense and every single down on offense in an 18-game season. It's not realistic, So they've got to find a way to have a good balance, no matter who drafts them. But the Giants in particular, they've got a bunch of different options that they can do there. So I like him there for the Giants. At number 4, I have the Patriots going wide receiver. Now, I have them going McMillan from Arizona. Don't want to try and butcher his first name because I'm sure I did it last time that we talked about this guy. But McMillan from Arizona, the wide receiver, the big-bodied wide receiver from Arizona, he could be a target for the Patriots. They, of course, were in the market for DK Metcalf, but they weren't, of course, able to get a deal done. So with that happening, and then, of course, Devontae Adams as well, going to the Rams, those are two of the biggest available wide receivers. I could see them go a guy like Cooper Kupp as just a veteran presence, but if we're talking draft, I think they go receiver, and McMillan makes the most sense because he's a good, I don't want to say consolation prize because he could end up being really, really good, but you want a DK Metcalf, but here's a guy that's built very similarly to DK Metcalf. Of course, he's a rookie, so he's not quite there yet in terms of experience and talent and all that stuff. But I could definitely see them going after him at number 4, especially with Travis Hunter most likely going to be gone, in my opinion anyway, with the Giants being the number 3 pick. That would be, if he is still available, I could see the Patriots drafting him for sure. But if he's not available, if the Giants or anybody else picks him up before the Patriots pick, I could see them going McMillan from Arizona, the wide receiver. So that's what the Patriots, we're going to get more into the Patriots here in a little bit when we go into our season outlooks. But that's who I think that they're going to pick. Now, to finish everything off, I've got the Jags at number 5. Their pick is going to be defensive lineman Mason Graham out of Michigan. That's who I think that they're going to go. They need help on that defensive line. We talked a little bit about the Jags a few days ago when we did their season outlook. They need a lot of different things, but defensive line is definitely one of them. I could also see them maybe going wide receiver, possibly, with this pick. They could get a top-flight wide receiver to pair with, Brian Thomas Jr., who had a tremendous rookie campaign where he was short of, in yardage anyway, short of only Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, who are widely considered the 2 best receivers in the league. So that would be a really good pairing, with those 2 guys. But, I ultimately think that they're going to go defensive line with this pick. Wide receiver class, they could probably get a guy in the second round, who could be a good contributor, maybe not a day one starter type guy, but there's still a couple guys in free agency that the Jags could pick up. And, obviously other players are going to become available most likely as this offseason continues. It's just kind of the way things work. So they could end up picking up a good, player. They could go, I know I've, name dropped Cooper Kupp quite a few times, over the past few shows, but I feel like he could fit in just about anywhere in this league. Anybody that needs a wide receiver, because he's a veteran presence. He's won a Super Bowl. He was once upon a time Triple Crown winner in the wide receiver department. So Jamar Chase did that this year, of course, but Cooper Kupp did it just a few years ago. So he's still a solid veteran, good leader. So that would be something that a young team like the Jags, especially with a young offensive-minded head coach that they just picked up in Liam Cohen, that could absolutely benefit them for sure. So that is all of my picks 1 through 5. Maybe I might do, the rest of the draft possibly as we get closer to the draft. Maybe I'll pick up the rest of my mock draft. But right now I've just got 1 through 5. So I hope you guys enjoyed that segment. Stick with us. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about our season outlook, our ongoing series that we've been doing. We're going to touch on the Patriots first. Then we're going to go to the Bills, and then we'll finish off with that last segment that we teased earlier in the show. So just stick with me for a little bit longer, and we will be right back after this break.
Is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
All right, guys, welcome on back to our third segment of the show. We are going to start diving on into our ongoing series, the season outlooks. Today, we've got the rest of the AFC East on docket. Today, we're going to go with the New England Patriots to start everything out. Take a look at what they did last year. Finished 4-13, last place in the AFC East as they try to rebuild that team. First year and only year head coach last year, Gerard Mayo. Not a great year overall for him. I personally thought it was a little, unfair to only give him 1 year, but the Patriots obviously had a plan in mind when they went ahead and they signed new head coach Mike Vrabel, former New England Patriots player, of course. Having him back in New England, and they also brought back Josh McDaniels as the offensive coordinator. He did such a great job with Brady when they were partnered together that I guess the Patriots feel like it's a good idea to go ahead and have him as they try and, get their young upstart quarterback, up to speed and possibly playing at, a high level. Drake May had a couple of, moments over the past year, over his rookie year, where he actually looked pretty solid. There's still a lot of growth there. Has still a young quarterback. He's not completely polished yet, obviously, but there were some signs that he could potentially grow into a franchise quarterback, and there's a little bit more optimism in New England than there has been over the past few years. They got a solid coaching staff in place now that they have gotten Mike Vrabel in the building to partner up with his other former New England guy, Josh McDaniels, as we mentioned before. But take a look at, more in depth as to what they did last year. They did, like I said, show some promise with Drake May. They just need now, because last year's offense was 30th in the league, obviously not where you want to be, but what they really need is some outside playmakers, because they don't really have anybody, really of note, on the outside. Maybe because there was talk that they might get DK Metcalf, but obviously that fell through, as we talked about a little earlier. But there are still some players out there that the Patriots could, look at and potentially go after in free agency, or if another team decides to, make one of their star players available. Now, one thing just to kind of keep an eye on is, I know there wasn't really much thought to it or much talk to it, but there was that small report of the Niners maybe trying to trade Brandon Ayuk. Now, we went through a whole thing with Brandon Ayuk last year when he was, trying to hold out for a contract. There was talk that he might go to the Steelers, ended up all falling through, and he got a nice big contract with the 49ers. Then, of course, he tears his ACL early in the year. Out all year was obviously a non-factor. So there's talk that maybe after that knee injury, maybe they don't want to risk, paying him all that money just for him to not necessarily be the same guy that he was when they signed him to that contract. So they could maybe, move on from him. If a team gave him a good enough price, you got to figure he's going to be worth at least one first-round pick, if not two. But coming off of the knee injury, maybe you could get away with offering just one first-round pick to get him. That's possible. But again, that was a small story. I don't know how much truth there was to it. originally when it first came out, but it's just a name there that I just, kind of keep an eye on a little bit because that might be kind of a weird story as we go along in the offseason. But Cooper Kupp, I think, would fit in perfectly there. He's a nice veteran receiver. Then you can go, and as I stated in the previous segment, you can go draft a guy like McMillan out of Arizona and have, a guy like Cooper Kupp who has that veteran experience, that Super Bowl pedigree, that comes with playing with the Patriots, with their 6 Super Bowl titles, over the last 20 years, when they had Brady and Belichick. So that is a guy that they could absolutely go after and, have Cooper Kupp sort of mentor McMillan as he grows as a receiver. So I think that would be a solid plan if you're a Patriots fan. Offensive line, of course, could probably get a little bit of an upgrade as well, just some depth on the offensive line. The running back situation, Ramondre Stevenson is the lead back as of right now. They could look for an upgrade in the draft, with the running back class being as deep as they have been or as they are now. The Patriots could absolutely, they'll have their pick of the litter, at number 4, whether or not they decide to go with a running back, that high up. You got to figure you got to have a guy like Saquon Barkley, maybe that kind of style in order for you to go, first round pick running back. Not a lot of teams do that too much anymore, but maybe they will in a draft class such as this, especially coming off of a year where running backs sort of had a little bit of a renaissance in the NFL in terms of their value, and how important and how vital it can be to have a strong running game with a star at the running back position, that could really help your team go a long way, especially if you have a lot of the other pieces around the running back to help, support him and create holes, whether that be an offensive line or a strong pass game to help back off the defensive coverage to give you more open holes to run through, if you're, an offense. So they could go running back. Don't see it happening in the first round, but, of course trades could happen. They could move up. We could move back. You never know. There's a lot of things that can happen for the Patriots, but overall what their needs are, wide receiver seems to be the main issue. Like I said, they'll probably go draft a receiver. Maybe they draft 2, who knows, but I definitely would think they would go receiver, free agency, and draft. Free agency, when I say free agency, I also mean via trade. So, whatever available wide receivers there are, they could absolutely go after them. Offensive line, like I said, needs improvement as well. Maybe they draft a guy there. They won't go after a guy like Ronnie Stanley anymore because he's off the board. He's going back to Baltimore on a 3-year deal. He would just be a veteran guy that you could have come in and, have that experience. Maybe not necessarily be your starter, but he could be a good depth piece just because he's getting a little bit older. And the Ravens themselves, even though they did re-sign him, you got to figure how long is he going to be the starter there with his injury history and his age. So, they, of course, will have backup plans as well. But Patriots could go lineman in the later rounds, I think. I don't think there is a lineman really out there that warrants a first-round pick, at least not this high of a first-round pick, especially when there are so many other holes on the Patriots that need to be addressed, wide receiver primarily being one of them, which is why I have them going wide receiver with that number 4 pick. Travis Hunter could also be an option. I know we mentioned that a little bit before. The Giants, I have the Giants taking Travis Hunter. If they decide to stay at 3, they could move up and take a quarterback for all we know. And if that happens, then maybe, just maybe, the Patriots are able to land Travis Hunter, which I know a lot of Patriots fans will probably really, really like that pick if they end up getting that pick because he is one of those, once-in-a-generation sort of players. Not too many players have come along that are quite like him, in terms of the talent at both different positions, both on offense and on defense. You don't really see that too much. He had a couple of other two-way players in the past. Deion Sanders played multiple positions at times, but never to the extent of what Travis Hunter is looking to do and what he has done in his college career. There's plenty of college players that play both positions just to kind of fill roster spots and depth charts and stuff like that. but nobody stands out quite like Travis Hunter did last year. Won the Heisman, best player in college football. So it will be a very exciting prospect to have, especially with a young quarterback in Drake May, if they decide to have Travis Hunter work in some offensive plays, which I feel like you would be kind of foolish not to if you get a guy like Travis Hunter. Why not use him to his full extent, his full ability? You know he's got the ability, so why not use it? So it'll be interesting to see what they do in that regard. As far as what I think their record is going to be, a lot of things can happen between now and, even tomorrow, really, with tampering opening up and everything and teams actually able to talk to different players. So these record predictions that I have tonight for you guys are probably going to be a little skewed just because of all the moves that could still happen. But as of right now, I have the Patriots about the same as what they did last year. I had them, or they finished 4-13 last year. I could see them getting to 6, maybe 7 wins, depending on what they do in the draft and, free agency. I like Drake May. I think he is a solid young quarterback. He's still got a lot to learn, a lot of growing to do, but the talent's definitely there. The arm talent is there. He's a smart enough guy to where he can learn, from any kind of mistakes that he made this past year. So he kind of reminds me only a little bit more slowly developed than what, like, say, Bo Nix, from Denver. Bo Nix kind of hit the ground running, whereas Drake May was solid, but didn't really, wow you as much as, say, like a Bo Nix did. But, to be fair, Bo Nix had a lot better talent around him, as a team overall than Drake May did, as far as having to work with different receivers and, all sorts of things like that. But I could see them, maybe surprising people and having a Denver-like year next year. But until they really shore up the, weapons on the outside, their playmakers and stuff like that, I'm still going to think that they're going to be shy of the playoffs, but I have them finishing probably third in that division, depending on what the Jets do. They're usually kind of at the bottom, or maybe the Dolphins will be at the bottom, but you never know. But I have the Patriots going about, I'll say 6-11 right now, and we'll see if they hit that mark or if they surpass it. It depends on what they do in the draft and free agency, just as you can say about every other team in the NFL this year and most years. But that's what I have for the season outlook for the Patriots. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, we are going to finish off the AFC East. We're going to talk about the Buffalo Bills. A lot to talk about with them. A lot of different headlines from them, especially over the past couple of days. And then, of course, we'll finish off with that final segment about the Steelers and what they are currently doing and what they need to do. So just give us just a few minutes. We'll be right back. So just hang tight.
Podcasts available anywhere. Go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
All right, guys, welcome on back to the next segment of our show. We just got done looking at the New England Patriots in terms of their season outlook, so now we're going to move on down to the final team in our AFC East coverage of season outlooks. We're going to talk about the best team in that division, and that's the Buffalo Bills. They, of course, won the division last year, got all the way to the AFC Championship game against Kansas City, and just like what has happened in all of the other times that they played Kansas City, they did lose that game. Overall, they finished the regular season with a 13-4 record. Josh Allen ended up winning MVP, of course. 40 total touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He had a couple fumbles lost throughout the course of the year as well. But overall, pretty mistake-free football, especially from Josh Allen's standpoint. Josh Allen tends to be kind of a gunslinger and kind of reckless at times with the ball, but that's just kind of the style that he plays. He puts me in the mind a lot of a Ben Roethlisberger kind of player. Only, of course, Josh Allen can move a lot better than Ben Roethlisberger could. But he's that same type of mentality. Like, he's got that Big Ben, Brett Favre type of gunslinger mentality. And that kind of gets him in trouble sometimes. But for the most part, last year especially, didn't really get them in trouble. They actually outperformed what I thought that they were going to do, because myself, as well as a lot of other people, thought that the Bills were going to maybe take a little bit of a step back last year with a lot of the players that they lost in the last offseason. You know, it looked like, especially when they were getting rid of Stephon Diggs, it didn't look like they really had too many options on the outside. But they worked with what they had. Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, the rookie from last year, those kind of guys, and of course the tight end pairing that they have in Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. Those are two solid tight ends, and then of course you have Josh Allen. But that cast and crew, they actually did a very, very good job last year, and I think a lot of that, not just Josh Allen, a lot of that I feel like had to do with their running game. James Cook came out, really, really on fire, for most of the year. He was a big difference maker in a lot of the games for the Bills, which is something that the Bills don't necessarily always have. When you think Bills, you just always think Josh Allen. You don't really think anybody else, unless you're talking about like a Damar Hamlin or something, but that's only, a well-known name because of that, horrible thing that happened to him on the field in that Monday night game against the Bengals a few years ago. But you usually always think Josh Allen when you think Bills. But, you started to kind of think, okay, Josh Allen and James Cook now. James Cook could come in and he could burst a couple runs and take some pressure off of Josh Allen. And I think him playing as well as he did last year had a lot to do with James Cook being effective, whenever they did use him. Now, you wouldn't mistake James Cook for a guy like Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry, but he's still a solid enough running back. He's solid enough to be the starter in Buffalo. So they're set pretty much there. They look like they're going to probably re-sign him. Depends on everything else that happens. Speaking of signings, they did make a couple of moves over the weekend. Greg Rousseau, their big defensive end, they re-signed him to a 3-year deal. Cut ties with Von Miller, which kind of opens up a hole that they need to go ahead and fill, but you got to figure they've got plans in mind to fill that hole after letting go of a guy like Von Miller. Now, Von Miller is 36 years old, so the release makes sense. He's not getting any younger, and he has had injuries over the past couple of years, been banged up a little bit, so that saves them a lot of cap room, and of course that helped them re-sign Josh Allen, who Josh Allen now becomes the highest paid quarterback in NFL history with his extension, his $330 million extension. Not really a surprise that they got that done. Josh Allen is currently the best player in the league. If you take a look at the MVP, awards, in terms of that, he's the best player, but definitely one of the best players in the league, regardless if you agree with, the best or not. He's definitely up there, and the Bills need him if they're going to go anywhere. Josh Allen takes them where they want to go, but they do need some help on the outside. They did draft their young, receiver Keon Coleman, who was solid last year. And of course, like I mentioned before, they have Khalil Shakir, and Mac Hollins as well is still there. But you feel like they need a guy, like a big playmaker kind of guy. And it doesn't seem like free agency is going to be where they go. They could re-sign Amari Cooper. That's a possibility. I know they picked him up from Cleveland in the middle of the season last year. He didn't really do a whole lot for them, but he's still a player that is solid, So I could see them re-signing him. They probably wouldn't have to pay a whole bunch of money to sign him, but maybe they go after somebody in the draft possibly. They're picking 30th overall in the draft, but they also have 2 second-round picks that are within about 5 picks of each other. I think one is about 56 and the other one's like 62 or something like that. Might have those numbers slightly wrong, but either way, they have a lot of early picks. So there's a number of different positions that they can go. I figure they probably go defensive line first with that 30th pick. Maybe they go somebody else, who knows. I don't see them going running back because I like how they have James Cook. I like him to continue to be the starter there. And then, of course, you always have the running threat of Josh Allen. So that is a threat in and of itself. So don't think they'll go running back. Maybe they go receiver. It's kind of a long shot. I don't think there's going to be a first-round receiver available with the 30th overall pick, which is what they have. So maybe they go defensive line. It's a deeper class, so they could absolutely still get starting material defensive lineman with the 30th pick. And who knows, maybe they trade one of those second-round picks to kind of move up, or maybe get a player who becomes available. Trey Hendrickson is a name that I would keep an eye on. They could potentially send a second-rounder to Cincinnati, since Cincinnati has let him go and explore trade options. The Bills need defensive line help. That could be a good way for them to just, secure that right after letting go of Von Miller and re-signing Greg Rousseau. Then you go ahead and you sign a guy like Trey Hendrickson, who led the league in sacks last year, and you're immediately better on defense, which is a huge, huge benefit for Buffalo, especially when they have to go up against Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City seemingly every single year. They're going to need a defense, of course. Even though the Chiefs' offense wasn't necessarily lighting it up all year last year, and certainly didn't in the Super Bowl, but the Bills always have to face them. And it's always, admittedly a very good game every time they play each other, but it's also kind of exposes a lot of the things that the Bills need as far as flaws and holes on the team, usually when they play them, so they need to do something to kind of try and get over that, hump. So I could see them going Trey Hendrickson on defense. Maybe they go somewhere in the secondary too. There's a couple of free agent potential acquisitions that they could go after. I know we've talked a lot about Mike Hilton. I still think he's a solid slot corner. Probably wouldn't have to pay a lot for him. And, you could stick him in there. And especially with Rasul Douglas possibly being gone, he's another free agent corner that's out on the market. And also DeMar Hamlin may not be back as well, as he is also a free agent. Don't know if they're going to, stick with those guys or not. DeMar Hamlin was never really a starter anyway, but definitely played more last year than he has been. So maybe they go secondary with those holes on offenses. They've still been trying to, fill the hole that Jordan Poyer left when he left last offseason. So maybe they look to free agency to potentially do that this year. A lot of guys out there. Travarius Ward is another guy. Nate Hobbs is a guy that I would look at who could potentially, shore up that back end there for Buffalo. But a lot of things can be done. I got to figure when you talk about, because I know a lot of people have talked about this with head coach Sean McDermott, because the Bills always get there, but they can't get over the hump. They can't get that monkey off their back that is Kansas City. And it's starting to sort of bleed into the headlines that maybe Sean McDermott has a little bit of a hot seat. Maybe it's not completely hot. Maybe it's just a little bit warm. But there's definitely been talk that maybe he's not the guy to lead the Bills anymore. I don't personally agree with that. But, the more and more that you fail in the playoffs, the more and more, highlighted your failures are going to become when you are the head coach of a team that is as popular as the Bills are and that are always contenders like the Bills always are. They're not, void of these kind of criticisms, much like Baltimore, because Baltimore is very similar to Buffalo in a lot of ways, which kind of makes those two meeting in the playoffs and it ending the way it did just kind of ironic. Because both of these teams have very good quarterbacks, very good teams all around them, and very good head coaches too. But for some reason, they just can't get over the hump in the playoffs, whether that be Baltimore not being able to get past the Bills because of a dropped 2-point conversion, or the Bills just not being able to get past Kansas City just because Kansas City, whether or not any of those are a factor, they got to upgrade, any way they can to try and get over that hump. So making some moves like they've already done kind of shows us that they are serious about making some moves. And wouldn't be surprised if we don't hear from them, or if we hear from them again, here shortly in the next few days or so. What they will do is always a mystery, and it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do as we get going here. But as far as the record is concerned, as far as the Buffalo Bills, don't see them being much different than this past year. They're going to be up there, probably going to win the division. 13-4 seems like a solid prediction. Maybe they take a little bit of a step back and get 12 wins, but I still think that'll be enough to win that division ultimately. But it's not about regular season with the Bills, and everybody knows that. Josh Allen knows that. Sean McDermott knows that. The owner knows that. All Buffalo knows that. It's about what you do in the playoffs, because lately what they've been doing in the playoffs is losing to Kansas City. No matter how great of a regular season that they have, they just always seem to lose to Kansas City. So until they get over that hump, people are just always going to see Buffalo as the yeah but team. It's like, yeah, they're good, but they always lose in the playoffs. So they're going to have to try and get over that. And it'll be interesting to watch them do it again, because they always have a fun team to watch. So, but so that covers our season outlooks for the AFC East, wrapping up there with the Buffalo Bills. We're going to take one final break, and when we come back, we're going to get into the final segment of the show, where I kind of put my Steelers fan hat on for a little segment here as we talk a little bit about what their, options are and what they have done so far with free agency looming here in the next day or so. So just stick with us. We'll be back with our final segment of the show. And thanks again, once again, guys, for joining me up to this point. So just give us a few minutes. We'll be right back. All right, guys, and welcome on back to our final segment of the day. And if you're a Steelers fan, you are in for a little bit of a treat, as this segment is called the State of the Steelers. This is just something that I originally wanted to do because it's kind of funny, because when I originally came up with this idea to do this last segment of the show as being the Steelers segment here, I was ready to come on here and talk a lot of negative things about how I feel the Steelers are going and like the direction that I feel that they're going, just simply because I read an article earlier today, and it was basically touching on the Steelers organization as a whole and whether or not they're a serious franchise, meaning are they a franchise that you still take seriously as a franchise that wants to win Super Bowls and that is a threat to win Super Bowls. And the argument being made on that particular show was that the Steelers are no longer a serious franchise. And even though I wouldn't necessarily 100% agree with them not being a serious franchise, because I do believe that they're trying to win, but I feel like they're just not going about it in the right way. And that's the issue. I wouldn't go so far as to say they're not a serious franchise, but I could see how somebody from the outside looking in might think that. There are a lot of issues with this organization overall. If you're not a Steelers fan, I don't expect you to really understand, because I typically get the same type of answers from people that I talk to about the Steelers, and my criticisms of the Steelers, because as a fan, I'm also one of its biggest, I may be one of its biggest fans, but I'm also one of their biggest critics. And that is rightfully so. Like, for example, somebody might say to you, why are you complaining about the Steelers? They're consistently always in the playoff hunt, and they never have a losing season. They're consistently always there. So that's what you might hear from somebody, and my response to that would be, that is very true. But the fact of the matter is there's been 7 straight playoff losses by this Pittsburgh Steelers team. 5 out of the last 7 years, the Steelers after Thanksgiving have lost at least 3 games in a row after Thanksgiving. That is a record of a team that starts strong and fades as the season goes on and as the games become more and more important and more valuable and vital to where you stand in the playoffs as to whether or not you go, or whether or not you win your division or completely crash out and lose your final 5 games to give up the division to a division rival, as what happened to the Steelers this year. So I was ready to come on and just basically keep that same tone the entire segment here. But then a little bit of news happened that we talked about earlier in the show, and that news being that DK Metcalf is becoming a Pittsburgh Steeler, and he is signed to a 5-year, $150 million contract. And this was literally when I was typing up some of the things or some of the ideas that I was going to present here in this segment. I get that notification that DK Metcalf is now a Steeler. And I am by no means changing my tune in terms of what I think the Steelers are going to accomplish this year and whether or not I feel like they're going to have the same result, which is ending in a wild card loss. I still believe that. And the only reason I do believe that is, and a lot of people will probably disagree with me here too, but is because the coaching staff is still the same. It's intact from last year, with the exception of a couple assistants that contracts expired and they moved on somewhere else. But those, and the basic guys, the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, head coach, those guys all remain, and I think that is the issue with the Steelers, is their loyalty to loyalty, essentially, is kind of what their issue is. And what I mean by that is they have this method, this, I guess you can call it sort of like a mission statement or a goal of them, a tradition of being loyal to everybody that they employ, essentially, especially when it comes to the coaching staff. That's their history. That's why they've only had 3 head coaches in the past 60 or 70 years or wherever it's been at this point, is they stick to their guns. They have faith in a guy, and they go and they get their guy and they keep him for longer than one season, which part of me does admire that about the Steelers. Is you see so many teams around nowadays that only want to give a coach 1 year and be like, oh, okay, you didn't do anything with a rookie quarterback and a young team around you, and how could you not make the playoffs? You're fired. That's not what I'm talking about here. This issue with the Steelers is a Mike Tomlin issue. And I know I've stated it before. If you ever follow any of the articles that I wrote for this website, you would notice, because I had a couple of things to say about Mike Tomlin, and I think he is the root of the issue with the Steelers. But they're not going to let him go, so I'm not going to get too much into Tomlin as well. But he's not the right guy anymore, in my opinion. But that's a conversation for another day. But in terms of their free agency period coming up here, my only thing, and they've proved it a little bit so far already with the DK Metcalf thing, is that if they're going to keep all of the staff that they're going to do, and don't expect Tomlin to get fired or anything, he's going to, at the very least, coach out his whole contract in 2027 and then be gone after that. Who knows? I don't know. If he wants to still coach, he'll probably be back. But as it stands, his contract runs out in 2027. Not going to be moved before then. Neither are any of the other coaches, I believe. Terrell Austin, maybe, if they have another slump towards the end of the year defensively, then maybe he could be on the outs. Arthur Smith wouldn't surprise me if he stays around for a couple of years. If they held on to Matt Canada as long as they did, then I wouldn't be surprised if Arthur Smith is there longer, possibly than Matt Canada was. And that may not be a bad thing overall, because I think the issue last year a lot had to do with Tomlin deciding to put Russell Wilson in instead of Justin Fields. I think, though it did warrant a couple of good games here and there, and the offense looked better, at least more explosive with the deep ball and everything, they weren't really, Justin Fields wasn't doing anything bad to warrant not coming back in. They were 4-2 with Justin Fields. He had 10 total touchdowns, 1 interception. But Tomlin decided to go Russell Wilson, and it just proved as the season went along that it wasn't the right move. And now with preseason or with free agency looming, I can only say that if you're not going to change the coaches, then you got to at least build this team up, to where there's no excuse anymore. Like, if this team is not talented enough, there can't be that excuse anymore. You put all your money into the defense, and the defense consistently falls off at the end of the year because the offense is not on the field hardly at all, because they're 3 and out usually most times that they're out there, whenever they're playing like quality teams anyway. And that's another issue altogether in itself, is when they play quality teams, they just get absolutely destroyed. It's never close. It'd be one thing if you're an up-and-coming young team, you play a really good team like the Chiefs or the Eagles or the Ravens, and you lose, relatively close. You fought hard, but, you just weren't the better team. But no, these games are over by halftime when they play quality teams, and it's just constantly the same story every year, which is kind of why it makes it kind of difficult for me to be super excited at a move like a DK Metcalf move, because the coaching staff is still the same one that's in place here, So until they do anything, change anything schematically, because I think that's a big issue, especially on defense. Schematically is an issue, especially because, you got a guy, for example, not to kind of trail off again here, but you got a guy like TJ Watt, who is getting chipped and double and triple teamed every single down on every single game, and you got a defensive coordinator that just won't adjust to it. Like, you see all these other great defensive players along the line, they'll move along the line if there's something that another team is doing to combat how well they play or how they can rush the passer. You'll see them bounce around. You see Myles Garrett does it a lot, and Michael Parsons as well. But as good as TJ Watt is, they don't allow him to do that. They say, you play on this side and we're not going to change it. You just got to be better, essentially. And TJ Watt's great, but he's not going to be able to beat 3 offensive linemen or 2 offensive linemen and a tight end and getting chipped every single play. You got to make adjustments. You can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. But as free agency gets ready to start here, my only piece of advice for the Steelers is don't mess around. Just go sign Justin Fields. You've got DK Metcalf now, the pair with George Pickens. So all of a sudden you've got a pretty strong receiver group, and you don't know what you're going to get out of Roman Wilson. He could potentially come in and be a really good game changer for you. He didn't play at all last year, so you don't know what you got. So you're strong at receiver now. Now you need to go get the quarterback. And since they went and they got DK Metcalf, I would expect the Steelers to sign a quarterback maybe by the time you're seeing this video. Maybe they have already done it. But I would expect it to be done very, very soon with the acquisition of DK Metcalf. It would not surprise me if I wake up tomorrow morning and they've got a deal done for somebody, whether it's Justin Fields, Sam Darnold, whatever the case. I want Justin Fields. I don't want Sam Darnold. I honestly don't want any other available quarterback other than Justin Fields. That's where I think the Steelers would be best fit to do, is sign Justin Fields, get this whole drama over with, and let's move on to the rest of the offseason, because there's a lot of other big decisions that they need to make as we continue here. But yeah, that is just one little segment I just wanted to add at the end there. Didn't necessarily say everything that I wanted to say, but for the most part, I just felt like I needed to touch on that, especially with the big news about DK Metcalf and then that article that I read earlier today too. So I wanted to touch on that because of that. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. As far as the rest of the show, that should just about do it. I do appreciate everybody for joining us and for sticking around. I know this is kind of a chunky episode, but thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Football Podcast. We are, of course, always presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, X, TikTok, Instagram, all the social medias for more content and updates. Thank you once again, guys, and I will see you guys next time as we continue our season outlook, and we're also going to continue talking about some free agency and some trades, as I'm sure there'll be plenty of news to talk about then. So until then, guys, thank you for joining me, and you guys have a wonderful day.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to